Hello, and thank you for tuning into Town Meeting TV's coverage of the General Election 2024. My name is Yamuna Turko, and this program is a part of a series of candidate forums hosted by Town Meeting TV in advance of the general election on Tuesday, November 5th, 2024. These forums are made possible by Town Meeting TV's generous underwriting partners. You can find all of our forums at cctv.org/general or on our Town Meeting TV YouTube channel, where auto-generated captions are available. If you're tuning on YouTube, click the subscribe button to stay tuned into local democracy this election season. On tonight's program, we will hear from two candidates running for the Vermont State Auditor's position. These candidates are Doug Hoffer and Brooke Paige. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Pleasure.
We have prepared a list of questions for each of you, and you will have 90 seconds to answer each question. Rebuttals will only be allowed if a candidate is named directly, in which case the candidate will then have 30 seconds to respond. If you're tuning in live, we also welcome your questions at 802-862-3966. If you call in, we will do our best to prioritize your question, but we will screen calls to ensure your questions are not being repeated. We ask that you share your name, the town you live in, and that your question be directed at all candidates and not just one in particular. You can also submit questions for future forums online at cctv.org/general. We will start with our 1-minute opening statements, and we will start with Doug.
Thank you very much. I will just say, because I don't think it's one of the questions, that a lot of folks don't know what we do in the auditor's office, and there are three primary responsibilities. One is to audit the state's financial statements. The other is to audit federal programs, the so-called single audit, to make sure that we're complying with federal rules and statute. And the other, which is of most interest to me and why I ran for the office, is performance auditing, which is intended to answer the question, is the money being spent as intended? Is it achieving the goals of the legislature and so forth? That's a lot of fun. The other two are important, but not nearly as much fun.
Thank you very much. Okay, and Brooke, we will go to you next.
Yeah, I'm Brooke Paige from the town of Washington, Vermont, and I'm running for auditor because I think the office needs to concentrate back on keeping track of where the money's being spent. You know, the auditors audits the state books and federal expenditures, and then does what they call performance audits. And I think far too much time is spent on the performance audits rather than really digging into the expenses of the state and rooting out waste, corruption, and fraud. I am not an accountant, nor am I an audit professional. And in fact, my intention is, if I'm successful in winning the race, is to immediately go, once I've been sworn in, to immediately go to the governor and ask that I be replaced with a highly skilled professional, a person that's run for the office in her own right, Linda Joy Sullivan, who happens to also be a Democrat. So I'm very bipartisan, I say. But Linda has the credentials to do audits of our $8.5 billion operation here in the state. And I'm convinced even if you could find 2% being misspent, you're still talking hundreds of millions of dollars that could be put to better use.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, we will now move into the questions, and we will begin with Brooke.
Okay.
The question is for both of you, but what do you think should be the top priorities of the auditor's office that should be addressed?
Okay. As I've already said in my introduction, I think that it's very important that we have a accounting and audit specialist as the head of the Auditor of Accounts office. I have on other occasions tried to get people that were highly qualified to run for this office, and these people that really have the skill set, don't really want to be politicians. You know, they want to come in and do the professional job. And in many states, these jobs are not political offices. They're appointments of either the legislature or the governor. And I think that's really how it should be here in Vermont. So my top priority is to get a professional in that can really scour the books and make sure that we're spending all of our money on a statewide basis and also on a local basis to find the monies that aren't being properly spent.
Thank you very much. And you may
Yeah,
begin.
just in response, if you go to our website, you'd see the audit of the state's financial statements, and we have professional auditors under contract every year doing exactly what you want. That's already happening, so I don't know what you're concerned about. As for me, I view this office as the state's accountability office. And as I said earlier, it's very important that the administration, and the legislature for that matter, be viewed independently and objectively in terms of the work that's done with our money on our behalf. The legislature doesn't have the resources, frankly, to follow up on its own work. They create programs and the administration administers them, but we need somebody independent, and that's what this office does. Performance auditing is done all over the country. It wasn't done before the 90s when the Government Accounting Standards Board really told the state auditors, following the money is the beginning of the conversation, not the end. That's the point of departure for a much more important conversation about, are we getting what we thought we were paying for?
Thank you very much. Okay, our next question, to switch gears a little bit, pertains to housing.
Okay.
The latest Vermont Housing Needs Assessment, assembled by the Vermont Housing and Finance Agency, found that Vermont would need to build between 24,000 and 36,000 new housing units to meet estimated demand over the next 5 years. What is the role of the Auditor's Office in addressing the housing crisis? And we will begin with Doug.
Well, we audit after the fact. Sometimes we can do descriptive audits and evaluate policies and programs that we haven't audited yet, just to help policymakers better understand it, because it's complicated. But, you know, to comment on a proposal is not what we do. We review programs that are in place and being funded. So, you know, it's not just the folks you mentioned, it's a lot of people. It's the chamber, it's the business groups who are all saying we need more housing. Of course we do. I'm not in a position to comment on whether the figures they presented and the proposals they made are appropriate, accurate, or optimal. That's not my job. If they have a program, if the legislature says, here's $100 million, and we're going to try to achieve those goals, we can look at how that's done and report to you and everyone else on whether it's working or not. That's what we do.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And Brooke?
Well, this will be a surprise. Doug and I agree on this. The Auditor of Accounts position office is not a policy shop. You know, it's not this job. You know, and you know, for whatever Doug or I feel about social policy and things like that, that's not this job. And I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Okay. Our next question pertains to accountability. What is the power of the Auditor's Office to hold the government accountable? What are the consequences for state agencies that do not meet their statutory charges? And what should should the consequences be steeper? We will begin with Brooke.
Okay. I think that the Auditor of Accounts office should be investigating to root out expenses that are improper, race, corruption, fraud. But in fact, the responsibility for enforcing those things falls to the Attorney General's office for the most part. And unfortunately, currently, the Auditor of Accounts office and the Attorney General's office have been having a few little dust-ups. And in one case, the office had to sue the Attorney General in an effort to get them to act on their behalf. So there needs to be a little bit more cordial relationship between Charity Clark or whoever is voted into office in place of her and the Auditor of Accounts office to make sure they have proper channels for enforcement.
Thank you very much. And
That's a really interesting question. Holding bureaucrats accountable. Our audits can't compel anybody in state government to do anything. That's commonplace around the country. What they do is present information based on evidence that we hope is compelling. And if we have recommendations to you, you're the commissioner of a department or you run a program, we hope that you'll take our recommendations and say, that makes sense, I'm going to do that. But we don't just walk away. A year after each audit, we go back and determine whether, in fact, they have implemented or adopted our recommendations. And we don't just ask them, we ask for documentation. And we do it again 2 years out. It's sometimes a problem because it's rare that we find people having done anything criminal. That's not the issue. It's whether they are, in fact, administering the program as intended, and whether they're achieving the goals. And you talk about waste, fraud, and abuse. There are lots of instances of programs, I wouldn't call it abuse, but bureaucrats, administrators, running programs in ways that were not intended, and money's being spent that didn't need to be spent or could be better spent another way.
Right.
I don't mean to pick a program, but within the program itself. In fact, we just completed a job of that nature. So accountability is very challenging, but we don't have that authority.
Thank you very much. Okay. Our next question pertains to property taxes and educational funding. Many Vermonters are seeing double-digit property tax increases this year, and the state legislature is considering new ways to fund education. What is the auditor's role in the creation of a new public education system and in limiting future tax increases?
As I said before, the auditor's office is not, we're not policy makers. So the question doesn't pertain to my office. Okay. Having said that, the first part of your comment/question was, it's a problem and it's hurting people as it is. And it is a problem. Many of these, except for the education fund, which is income sensitive, which is better than nothing, property taxes are very challenging. We issued a report recently that called on the administration to reflect, frankly, on the fact that the most recent year, the state, as an employer, spent $200 million on health care for its employees. $200 million in 1 year. And for teachers, it's 2 or 3 times that much, because there's a lot more of them. But if you're concerned about the cost of education, yes, we should talk about the way we fund it, but we should also talk about issues like this, health care for teachers who deserve decent benefits, and city and state employees as well. So that's the kind of work we can do, but we can't fashion a new program for funding public education.
When I read this question, I said, oh, that's kind of interesting, because once again, not a policy shop, but the one thing that could be subject to analysis and audit is the performance of the schools in providing proper education. I think that sadly, the students, at least in K through 12, were paying for a Cadillac education system, and we're really kind of getting the Yugo. Maybe that shows how old we are. They probably don't even know what Yugos are, but little compact car.
Slovakian, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
But we're not getting what we need for our students. We're paying the money. I mean, $20,000, $25,000, $30,000 a year per student, and they're coming out. Graduating from high school with at best an 8th or 9th grade education, unprepared to go out into the world. And that's something that certainly could be looked at from a performance standard.
Thank you.
Can I make one quick comment? Obviously, people are concerned about the performance of kids in schools, but as important as the actual teaching in the classroom is, and it's critical. My brother was a teacher for 30 years. It's also, there are so many other external factors that the state has no control over. So it's a really challenging issue that can't be limited. And what criteria would you use? How would you measure the performance of the teachers? Anyway, I don't want to belabor it, but it's an interesting question that is way beyond the scope that you mentioned.
Well, if I may, the thing that has upset me in our local school district, and it's every school district throughout the state, is over the past 8 to 10 years, we've eliminated all of the ability to measure the performance of the students. They had kneecap, I think, was first. Then they had something that sounds like a margarine, direct balance, and then now they've gone on to some other standard, and they never did an analysis of how did one standard match up with the next one. We just go to one when the performance is falling downward. Now we have something new. That performance shows worse and worse and worse, and then they go to the third one. It's the old game whack-a-mole. It's like they're just
lots of variation.
Yeah. And they're hiding the fact that the student performance is on a descending path.
Yeah. To recenter a little bit to the specific office, thank you for your comment.
Very good.
A question I had that's not on this sheet, if I may.
Absolutely.
In listening to everything you're saying, both of you mentioned policy. That's not the role of this position. What do you think are the largest misconceptions that the public has about the office? And we'll begin with Brooke.
Okay. Well, I think a lot of people don't understand, or or what the office is supposed to be doing. And I think some of that is because there's been an over emphasis on the performance audits and things of that nature. And I don't think, Doug says, oh, we have a complete audit. I remember, I have it in my little collection of antique books and things. I actually have an audit report from the Auditor of Accounts office from, I think it's like 1910 or something, and it just has pages and pages, thick volume of all the things that the state spent its money on. And I think it would be wonderful for people to be able to access it. Now, how many would actually?
It's on my website.
Okay. I'm unable to find it, but that's okay.
Really?
But my point is that we really need to get back to the basics, and we need people to understand that the big part of the auditor's job is to try to make sure all the money is being spent properly. The office has been doing a lot of things. Like one big thing that could have saved the state a lot of money was the EB-5 program. It's astounding that the auditor's office did not catch the EB-5 problem until it was long over. And that's wound up now costing the state over $18 million because the performance of the state was so bad that the state's liability insurer, AIG, refused to pay. Eventually, they agreed to pay a token amount, $800,000, out of the $14 or $16 million that the taxpayers are going to have to, put out. But now, after the fact, they did issue a report just literally days ago, if I remember correctly.
Not exactly.
Well, September 3rd is the date on it.
Last year.
2014, unless I'm wrong.
14.
Thank you very much.
What is this year is 2014, correct?
The EB-5 report, no, this is not 2014. In any case.
Your time is up. Thank you very much.
In any case.
Anyway, 2014.
Just to be clear for people who are watching and listening, everything he's saying we should be doing, we do. The audit of the state's financial statement is a big document, hundreds of pages. It's presented every year by the firm that we hire to do that. It's all taken care of. The performance auditing is not wishful thinking. It's critical work. Otherwise, no one would do what we do. If the legislature creates a program and allocates $50 million, if we don't go back during or after that expenditure, how would we know how that money was spent? The only people around to talk about it would be the people who did it. Mm-hmm. That's not independent. That's not objective. So that's why we do what we do, and I think we've added a lot of value, and people seem to like the work.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay, moving back to the questions on the page. I wanted to give and have people understand, more holistically, because even myself, when I was coming into this, I wanted to do research to understand, the position and what the office does. So I think it's really vital to explain, the different aspects and why you think what's important is. So moving back into this, moving into fraud and corruption. The Auditor's Office released a new report this year detailing the lack of oversight that led to the EB-5 scandal, which has been brought up. What has been done and what more can be done to prevent conflicts of interest, fraud, and oversight issues in the state government? And I know you both briefly have touched on this, but maybe we can go a little bit more into it. And we'll begin with Doug. My apologies.
No, that's quite right. The question is an important one, and there are some embedded conflicts that the legislature doesn't seem ready to address. For example, the Agency of Agriculture is responsible for promoting agriculture and regulating some aspects of it at the same time, particularly as the results of phosphorus running into the lake become greater. Those responsibilities should be in the Agency of Natural Resources, but they remain in the Agency of Agriculture. We have similar conflicts in other parts of state government, but there are vested interests that like things the way they are, very powerful. For example, we did a job, back to ag, on dairy, and we've spent $300 million on dairy in the last 5 years at the time we did the report. $300 million. And a growing portion of that is to clean up the problem of dairy, sometimes in part because of the large dairy farms we have now. We have more cows and fewer farms, and a lot fewer farmers. But it's a strange business, but the state's in the business of promoting that. And it's a hard conversation to get them to agree to give up on the regulatory part because they're working from both sides. EB5 was another problem. You know, the Agency of Commerce promotes business. And in that case and others like it, they were asked to regulate business. And you can't do both. You can't do both well.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay.
The EB5 program, I think, was unique to Vermont. Vermont was the only one that administered its own program, and I think that was a big part of the problem, was that, you know, they were trying to wear both hats at the same time, so nobody was minding the storm. Although maybe the Auditor of Accounts office should have been taking a little bit closer look.
I wasn't in office when it started.
Okay, but you were there for a good portion of it.
No, I was there for about 20 minutes until they got busted.
Okay.
Seriously.
But the other thing that's concerning is the after action report that was written seemed to want to point exclusively to the bad actors and not talk about all the people that were in government that were out there getting their pictures up.
Excuse me. If we had found evidence of state officials breaking the law, we would have said so. We didn't find that evidence.
But plenty of state officials were getting...
State officials made bad decisions, and their judgment is questionable. That's not the same as criminal activity.
I didn't say criminal activity.
Well, then what would you have me do?
My point is that it was not pointed out that all of them benefited from the program. They were out.
How did they benefit?
They were out there giving big handshakes and getting publicity shots. I mean, I have
state officials. They do
Yes.
that all the time.
Okay.
They're at the chamber. They're out cutting ribbons. That's what they do.
And to the extent that gave them credit for promoting business in the state, it was a problem. I mean, the one that makes me insane is the project up to Newport, where they were basically saying they were going to start growing human organs. And when I saw that, I said, when, you know, because in college, I studied biology for a fair amount. I said, when did this happen? You know, I was thinking, you know, like, this is like miraculous. Of course, why the devil would you put it in Newport, Vermont, if you had it? That was another question. But it was all a scam. That whole aspect of the thing was absolutely made up from whole cloth. And the only thing that Vermonters got out of it is a giant hole in the middle of downtown Newport, Vermont. And I guess my point is that somebody needed to be minding the store on behalf of the taxpayers, so they didn't wind up with an $18 million bill after the fact.
Thank you. Okay. Our next question is pertaining to emergency shelter, to circle back to the housing question. Vermont reported 3,295 people experiencing homelessness in 2023, up from 1,100 in 2020. This year, the state has rolled back its pandemic-era emergency shelter capacity across the state, pushing hundreds more Vermonters onto the streets. What must be done to review and adjust the state's approach to emergency shelter in specific relation to this office?
I've lost track of whose turn it is.
It's another policy
It's your
question.
turn.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Well, this is, yes, more a policy question, but specifically, what role would you have in it
To audit he doesn't want me to, but we would audit any programs that were created and funded. That's what we do.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, let's roll it back here. I think that first of all, it is a policy question, and so you can't get out, you can't put the cart in front of the horse in all of this. But the thing that I think that's worthy of looking at is how the homeless and the temporary housing program has decimated the tourist business through basically eliminating moderately priced hotels and motels throughout the state. All of those units are now being rented out by the state to house families and individuals who are considered homeless, many of whom have come to the state specifically because we have a fairly generous benefit portfolio. And so all of the businesses that rely on middle-income people to come and vacation in Vermont have no place to stay. And I think that's something worthy of discussion and whether or not, the state should even be doing that.
Thank you very much.
Actually, you're close, but part of the problem of housing is that not just in Vermont, but around the country, particularly in places that are very popular, a lot of housing has been turned into Airbnb-type temporary housing. And when you take hundreds and thousands of units out of the market for regular folks, then you're going to exacerbate a problem which is already troubling. So that's too bad. And some of the communities, I know Burlington and some other places, have tried to deal with that. There are some legal and moral issues, but we need to do more about that, for sure.
Thank you very much. Let me review my questions. I want to be able to frame the questions we have more into specific questions that pertain to your office and the office that you're both running for right now.
May I suggest healthcare?
I was actually looking at healthcare next. Looking at healthcare, there are some policy pieces in it, but I would suggest and recommend looking at it the view of, you had mentioned auditing and reviewing and proposals and taking it in that aspect. So healthcare, the cost of healthcare is on the rise across the state. A recent report from the independent consultants recommended major changes to operations at 4 Vermont hospitals. What is the role of the auditor's office in fixing or auditing the state's healthcare system? And we will begin with Doug.
I can't comment on proposals from a consultant. I think a lot of them make sense. You've already seen the pushback from some of the hospitals and the Hospital Association and others, which is predictable and understandable. The change at that level and magnitude is very challenging, but we have no choice. This is not sustainable. And you said healthcare has been going up in cost recently. It's been going up for 20 years at a dramatic rate. And we did a job a few years back on the Green Mountain Care Board, which was created by the legislature and given considerable authority in this area. And we said, the statute says that one of your primary obligations is to control costs, and you haven't done that. And the then chair of the Green Mountain Care Board said to me, well, Doug, they told us to do it, but they didn't say when. I mean, that kind of arrogance drove me insane. Healthcare is critical. There's nothing bigger than that, maybe climate change. It's 20% of the state's economy, and we have to solve this problem.
Thank you very much.
I think that there are aspects of healthcare that could be looked at from the audit perspective. Much of what the Care Board and the legislature have done is to consolidate healthcare. A lot of it under the University of Vermont healthcare system. And by taking smaller hospitals out of the mix, they've reduced competition. Also, the Green Mountain Care Board has also tried to prevent independent practitioners from doing things that UVM specifically wanted to keep in their purview, such as MRIs and X-ray labs and things like that, opening up independently. And through the review process for, there's a name for it, I'm not coming up with it, the review process for, I'm getting all these little signs. No, it's okay. The review process, they've been able to hold these people back and prevent them from opening up.
Certificate of need.
The certificate of need, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And we'll move into 30-second closing statements, beginning with Brooke.
Okay. Well, as I said at the outset, I am not an accountant, nor am I a professional auditor. My desire is to have someone with those credentials serve as the auditor of accounts. And as I said, there's an individual who is interested in doing this, has actually campaigned for the office on a couple occasions. And if I'm fortunate enough to be elected, I would recommend to the governor to immediately replace me with a local Vermonter, Linda Joy Sullivan, to replace me. She has the credentials and she's been in the legislature and knows exactly what needs to be done.
Thank you very much. You may begin.
Thank you. You didn't mention at the outset, but I am the current auditor of accounts. And
Apologies.
I've been elected 6 times, and I love the work. I love the team that we have. That, by the way, includes 11 professional auditors. If you want somebody with credentials, we got lots of them. I enjoy the work. I think we add value. The work we do troubles some very powerful interests. We don't have time to go into it here, but the pushback from this administration, the Supreme Court, and the Attorney General and some others is evidence that we are pissing people off. And when you do that in this job, you're doing something right.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for tuning in to Town Meeting TV's ongoing coverage of local candidates, local budgets, and ballot items. You can find this in many more forums at cctv.org/general or on our Town Meeting TV YouTube channel. Don't forget to cast your ballots in the general election on or before November 5th. Then tune into Town Meeting TV's result recap show that evening at 7:30. Contact your local clerk to find out how to obtain a ballot and register to vote. In Vermont, you can register on Election Day. Thank you so much for watching and sharing Town Meeting TV.
Thank you, Yamuna.
Thank you very much.